anything to add. I just want to thank you all for your participation and your ongoing work. So, Rick, you have anything to add?
Well, the only thing I'd add is I'm sure that most of you saw the article in the Chronicle about task forces and the mayor and how he's using them to kind of hide behind them but not implement their work. And I think that it was a pretty unfair article because in my view the task force is about creating information for people, bringing constituent groups together that haven't really talked to each other in the past, and try to build. At least I'm talking about our task force. Try to build, sort of trust and an information base that we all can agree on. And I think some of the things that we've done so far, including the ordinance and including the discussion of how to make the city or help the city and the county put the money out that they're putting out for rental assistance. We improved that process, I think, pretty well. And so I think there's a lot of cynicism in political worlds, and we are in a political world. We're not a political body, but when we send our recommendations and information to the politicians and the local officials, they have their own issues they have to deal with. And so we shouldn't feel bad about that, because to me, we're creating a lot of value by just opening the dialogue with everyone that we have on this call. And there's been a lot of sidebar conversations with folks, and I think that's really healthy for the community. I think we're doing great work. So I just wanted to make sure that if you did see that, I don't believe that it's a waste of our time. I think it's actually really productive and good. So I just wanted to start it out that way. That's all I got.
And I totally echo what Rick said. So thank you all. I guess next on the agenda, we can move forward, Claire, with Stephen and your update.
Great, Stephen, you should be able.
Great. I think given the timing that we have, I think we'll hand it over to Representative Wally and Marvin.
Great, and I am unmuting you now, so you should be able to. There you go. You should both now be able to update.
Great. Well, maybe I'll just start, because what I wanted to say is almost exactly what Rick just said. So thank you, Rick, for putting that in very good words. I mean, from someone sitting on the city side of this and watching the dynamics, and if I again just take everything Rick said, and if I just jump straight to the bottom line results, I look at what this group's influence has been. And the two big things that jump out at me are, much improved alignment around the rent relief program and the details behind that and so forth. So that's one piece. And also, if you project that forward, the next time we do one of these, and almost certainly there'll be more required, we'll be even better about getting it right. So there's an educational component there that I think is absolutely critical. The other is, the city's involvement in the rent relief program that's going out now, I think was a direct result, and I know it was a direct result of the ordinance discussions that happened before. And again, emphasis on the need, choosing a route that looked like this rather than the other, but I think very significant influence for this group, and my appreciation for my small role in this, my appreciation for what you're doing and what you're giving us. So thank you.
So good morning to everybody. I had to move away. A lot of noise in my house right now. But I want to say thank you to the task force for the work that you guys are doing. One of the things that has been positive about this is on, just to give a brief report, on, I guess, August 14th, the task force rental assistance working group issued their recommendations in the side-by-side. And that was very instructive that morning when we all reviewed them. And myself and Marvin and the staff really got together on the ball to call a meeting literally that day, that afternoon, about 3 o'clock, that Marvin, myself, the city and the county, our friends over at the Guidehouse, to actually get actually everybody on the same page, to kind of figure out what could we do to align the rental assistance program, and including Baker Ripley. And so it was very instructive. I thought it was a very positive meeting. You had folks in there that hadn't really talked to each other in the past. I think that was very, very helpful. The letter from the foundation was helpful. But I think seeing the actual side-by-side of the differences in the county and city's programs were helpful in trying to align not all the recommendations, but a good portion of them. And so we actually had Precinct 1, Precinct 2 staffs on. We actually, we even got Commissioner Garcia on the call on short notice. And there was probably more than a dozen of us that got on the call and went through kind of line by line what recommendations could the city and the county align with. And Commissioner Garcia took the ball. He tried to get, he reached out to the county judge, and we tried to get some of those recommendations implemented in an emergency meeting, but it didn't happen. So it happened this past week where you had an item that was passed by Commissioner Garcia, and it read, to better align Harris County's emergency rental assistance program with the City of Houston's program. He made a motion to modify the Baker Ripley program as an amendment. And what it did, and I'll be real brief on this, and folks could include, add some more color to it, but it increased the award limitation from $1,200, particularly on the county level, to $1,900 per household. It extended the landlord enrollment through actually to tomorrow. Landlords intended to register due to the increased award limitation or amount. But it also, what it also did, and I think it's the direct result of the work that you guys did, is it actually increased the allotment for rental assistance to $15 million. So you got an extra $15 million on top of what was already appropriated. So you're talking about more than $40 million in rental assistance. And then obviously what the city did in their $20 million package, with combination of private and CARES Act money, that was very helpful. And what it also did is the next item on the agenda from the Commissioner's Court was by Commissioner Ellis, that included another, I think, another $15 million for direct assistance that was provided to, I think, Catholic Charities to stand up and do direct assistance. So I just want to say that none of that, any of those dollars that are going to needy folks, vulnerable communities, would not have happened but for the work that you guys did. So I'm very pleased about that. It is something that many of you guys that do this work on a daily basis can take satisfaction in. That look, and I echo a lot what Marvin says. We can't help everybody. I mean, the scale of need is vast, but and great. But the work that you guys did has been so invaluable to me, because it's helped me make the argument to Judge Hidalgo, to our commissioners. And let me tell you that I spent all weekend on the phone with Rodney and Adrian and Lena, and I should give them their due, the judge and the two commissioners and everybody, working them over to try to get this done. And credit to Commissioner Garcia as well. He worked over the weekend. We were texting back and forth Saturday, Sunday, saying, "Hey, where are we on these recommendations?" And him and his staff and our friends, I think, is that Todd Hoffman from Guidehouse on here? So he can tell you that there was an extreme lot of pressure, and from if we're talking politics too, extreme a lot of political pressure to do this and do this right. And so I just want to say thank you to each and every one of you. and it wouldn't have happened but for your work. I'll stop there. If y'all have any questions, y'all can interrupt me, but I know Rachel's on the line, my staff member. I do want to give her a shout out, and to Stephen and those folks for on such short notice getting that meeting together, that the same day of the recommendations coming out. You know, they pulled a meeting together that day. Marvin got on. I mean, it was, you know, Jeremy, it was very gratifying that, you know, everybody that had an interest in it dropped what they were doing and got on this call and tried to hammer something out. And I think that, look, again, in any kind of negotiation, you're not going to get all that you want, but I think we moved the ball forward in trying to at least align the programs, but also have an open line of communication between the city and the county. And, you know, we had both Tom McCaskill on, we had our city folks, or our county folks, department heads on the call as well. And it was a good call. I'll stop there if y'all have any questions, but we can flush anything out. But I know you got a long agenda, but I just want to say thank you. That's it. I appreciate you guys' work, because none of this work doesn't get done. Rick and Jeremy and Marvin, none of this work gets done without you guys putting the work. And, you know, just seeing the 2 rows of people that are on the Zoom, I know this is important to you guys. So thank you. I appreciate you guys.
Well, thanks to both of you. Let me just do a quick little overview of what we're going to do for the rest of the meeting. And then we're going to first start off with both Martha McCrease and Jeff Sties giving a very quick overview of what the working groups have been doing. Next, I think we're especially excited to have a presentation from a national perspective, and Erica Pothig at the Urban Institute, who I think is probably the first person who I reached out to when we were even thinking about trying to have a local effort here, because of the extraordinary work that she has been leading, not just that in response to COVID, but more generally around housing through the platform of the Urban Institute. And so after she presents, we're going to break out into small groups and react to her presentation. And then we'll come back together. And then Jeff Reichman is going to give us what will be a regular part of our meetings on an ongoing basis, which is just an update on where eviction filings are. And so with that, I will turn it over to Martha and Jeff.
Good morning, all. The Rent Assistance Work Group, as you know, and you've heard already, has been extraordinarily busy. We jumped right in at the beginning of our work with a response to the Baker Ripley proposal to the city and the county. And I want to thank all of you for the incredible work that you did. That challenge forced us really to create our 10 principles of rent assistance, which starts to shape the goal that we have of hopefully eventually getting a bit ahead of the game and developing models and that we believe are best practices to fit our location. To do that, we have had a number of different, I'm sorry, we're waiting for the screen share here. Okay, if you would go on to slide 2. And as I said, we're doing the models of rent assistance. You can move on to slide 3. And what we really have been focusing on is how do the people who benefit from these efforts experience this? And we want to improve both landlord and tenant experience. So the task force is built of people who, there are 16 members and 14 are from this task force, which means that there are a great many of you are involved already. We wanted to make sure that we had the client voice from our advocates, we had providers, we had landlords and attorneys who were available to us. So we've had some improvements there. Go ahead, next slide. We've also really focused on building the knowledge of our task force particular, but also open those sessions to the full task force. We've had several presentations both on what we have already learned from programs, either current or past crises. We worked, and I want to give a tip of the cap to Renee for bringing the program as it was being developed to our group to be able to benefit from those resources and voices at the table. That's a first time a lot of that has happened in this city, and we usually do that in silos. And also the continued learning from Elena White and Fahad Pujwanit. So our goal now is to create a model of optimal programs for our community and start to identify groups that might want to pilot project that. Jeff, you want to take it over? And these are our illustrious members.
So next slide, please. So one up, please. So just like the rental assistance working group, we think about how we work first. Again, we're looking for those creative and sustainable ways. You know, and everything we heard is once the notice to vacate or the eviction is filed, you're working against the currents. So how do we think about moving that upstream, right? We want to make sure that before that notice to vacate is delivered, how do we work with clients and tenants to resolve agreements sustainably? The other thing we've been really thinking about, how do we get clear, accurate, and concise information to people who need it, and especially when they need it? And especially this LISC, we're thinking about LISC as the backbone organization. You know, we'll provide the support for these initiatives, but it's actually, we'll be working with our partners for the implementation. So next slide, please. So what are we working on? Well, the first thing is really, how do we develop a comprehensive web portal that has all the information on it for either a landlord or tenant who may be facing eviction, right? So I'm a fairly savvy user. I spent a day and a half looking for information, and I went around in a lot of circles. So we're thinking about how can we create that one source? And our first phase really is how do we pull information so people can have the information they need and help themselves. And then the second phase really is about how do we provide good and very user-specific referral information. You know, the best case scenario is that when I've looked at websites, they've asked me 3 or 4 questions, and with those questions, they targeted me to the right organization. The next thing we're really thinking about, and again, we're gonna come back and talk about this, Martha and I, in a minute, because we're trying to think about how do we create a landlord-tenant mediation or facilitation program. You know, what we really heard from those tenant and landlord interviews is that, you know, sometimes tenants are afraid to talk to their landlords, but landlords want the tenants to talk to them before they get in a crisis situation. And given that fact, and we want to move things upstream, we've got a way we're going to start thinking about that. So next slide, please. And here is our working group. You know, many members of this committee, but also we have Ann Chandler from Houston Volunteer Lawyers and Nick Hall, who is with our Dispute Resolution Center here in Houston. And now we talk about how do we align both the rent assistance and legal services. This is some of the most challenging work when you try to bridge between 2 different systems. And again, we really want to think about how do we make that facilitation happen before there is the actual crisis. You may or may not know this, but right now, if you are in need of rental assistance and you call a local assistance ministry, one of the first questions you get asked is, do you have a notice to vacate? For the vast majority of people, if they say no, but I'm not gonna be able to pay my rent, they're told to call back when they have that notice to vacate. So we think there's an opportunity at that point. We can do almost a soft intervention to help create the connection between landlord and tenant. And again, this is the stuff that we're thinking about now. You know, level 1 would be that coaching, really helping the tenant think about how to approach and how to talk to that landlord. but in a very supportive and individualized way. Level 2 might be the involvement of your facilitator in a direct conversation between landlord and tenant. And number 3 really is about speaking with each party separately, doing some of that shuttle diplomacy. And we've been very specific about not using the word mediation in this part, because according to Texas law, if you're going to be a court-appointed mediator, you need 40 hours of training. And we're trying to be really sensitive that we don't either confuse or like take that away from people who have had that training. And Martha's going to take us out on kind of where we are and where we hope to be going with this stuff.
Thank you, Jeff. What is really unique about these conversations right now is it has been our goal to bring groups that work with the population together who don't ordinarily know each other or much about what each other are doing. And the providers, both community-based organizations and assistance ministries, really don't have any knowledge of legal services. Oftentimes they don't know about eviction processes and what should be happening and what shouldn't be happening. They're really a transactional kind of service that pays the rent in order to keep people housed. So we are working with 3 groups: ACAM, which is the Alliance of Community Assistance Ministries, the Dispute Resolution Center, and Houston Volunteer Lawyers. ACAM is hosting a meeting with their staff that will be a training session with the Dispute Resolution Center that will begin to educate them about that process and also what mediation is, and help them to understand what's going on one side of the line. ACAM has also modified its current program to qualify tenants at 14 days prior to a vacate date, which is really, really helpful because it allows time for some conversation. What we know from past experience with the Greater Houston Community Foundation and Connective is that landlords and tenants don't typically talk to each other early enough in the game. And if these community-based organizations can begin that process, simply even by asking, have you talked to your landlord? Changing their procedures a little bit just to encourage that relationship, it will lay a foundation for a new type of process. And I think that's it.
Terrific. Thank you very much, Martha and Jeff. And now I am going to hand over the mic to Diana to introduce our special speaker and visitor.
Morning, everybody. So Erica Pothig is Vice President and Chief Innovation Officer at the Urban Institute. She leads the Research to Action Lab there. You have her full bio in your packet. I think Research to Action Lab perfectly fits kind of as a shorthand for what Erica stands for. She believes in data and research and great policy work, but she really cares most about making an impact in cities and communities. And she knows that happens by working with leaders, local leaders like you all here today. So you can read her bio. She has an incredibly distinguished career in housing and urban policy work at the national level and at Chicago. But I just wanted to add a little bit of color from seeing her in action. So we had the opportunity to work together while I had a short stint under the Obama administration, and she was at HUD for quite some time, and observed her in some tough policy negotiations and collaborative work with multiple perspectives, all trying to make a decision and make something happen. And I admired her intelligence, her policy expertise, her persuasiveness and political acumen, her constant focus on vulnerable communities, and most of all, her no-nonsense approach. She really reminded me of Texans, which while in DC, I really missed very much. And she did it all while being an incredible mother and a real person. So whether Erica knows it or not, I admired her tremendously while I was there. And from afar ever since, I think she's doing really cool work, innovative work. And with that, I'll just turn it over to her. I'm excited to see her and excited to hear from her.
Oh my goodness, Diana, thank you. That was one of the best introductions I think I have ever received, and probably one of the highest honors to remind you of Texas. So I am really, really, truly honored. And Diana, we had a terrific time working together, and I hope accomplishing a lot for communities across the U.S. And it's just a pleasure to be here with you today, to be invited by Stephen, but to see other familiar faces like Diana. Janela Day is on the call, I see, and Janae and I had the chance to work together at the Urban Institute and others. So thank you very much for the invitation. Stephen asked me to share some data and information, which is what I like to do, sort of set the conversation with some data and evidence, but also be available to you as well as you are doing this incredible work. And I've been so impressed by your thoughtfulness, and I hope what I'm going to say today is going to resonate strongly with work you're already doing. And if I can be a resource to you about what's happening at the national level, or even some insight about some of the other work that's happening across the country at the local level, I hope we can do that in today's conversation. So I'm going to share my screen, and I have a presentation that I will do. Yes, there we go. All right. There we go. Oops. Sorry, let's see. It landed in the last page. There we go. Okay, can everybody see that? Terrific. So I want to focus the conversation today on really the racial and ethnic disparities in rental housing pre-COVID and during the COVID crisis, because I think, as you all are already well aware, there are tremendous equity issues and considerations of this crisis. And I saw that really reflected in the agenda that you put forward. And I'm going to elevate those at the national level, but I'm going to end with sharing a tool that we just put out this week that would allow you to get to the census tract level in Houston to understand some of these impacts and how to think about targeting your resources. So let's just remind ourselves, before COVID, I know myself, I'm having a little bit of a hard time remembering what life was like before COVID, but we had a lot of sizable racial and ethnic disparities in housing before, as we entered into this crisis. So we know, for instance, that people of color are more disproportionately renters. And this chart basically shows that Black households are 58% renters, Hispanic households 52% renters. They have amongst the lowest income among renters and the least amount of liquid assets, which makes them very vulnerable to eviction even before the crisis, but even more challenging to think about building toward homeownership as well. Before the crisis, people of color, Black and Hispanic in particular, faced difficulty paying rent. We see this reflected in higher cost burdens and rent burdens across the country, and especially for extremely low income households. Black renters experienced high rates of eviction before the crisis. And now let's really look at what the pandemic has done with these disparities during this crisis. So I don't think this will be a surprise to anyone, but just to remind us that Latinx and Black workers are overly represented in industries affected by COVID-19, particularly Hispanic workers who have lost jobs, work hours, and other kinds of work-related income. This is data from March and April from a survey that the Urban Institute fielded that really showed this disproportionate impact for particularly low-income Hispanic workers. But at the same time, I would just offer as a backdrop to this is the other side of this, which is the reason why we've been able to work from home, and I am saying this for myself, is because of the low income and largely people of color who are delivering food, who are in grocery stores, who are enabling me to be able to work from home. So we've both been affected by unemployment, but also exposed risk to the virus. So over the decade of 2010 to 2020, we saw unemployment come down after the last recession. And then you see this chart basically demonstrates the spike that we've seen as a result of COVID, and that Hispanic and Black workers are disproportionately impacted by unemployment and overly represented in COVID deaths at all age levels. So this is data from Chicago that just overlays the impact of segregation and COVID deaths. So Chicago, which is where I'm from, is a very racially segregated city. Early on in the crisis, the data had come out that though Black households only represent a third of the city, Hispanics represented another third of the city's population. Black households represented 70% of the deaths. And so this resulted in Mayor Lightfoot developing equity task force that really targeted outreach for COVID, but the interrelationship between housing segregation and health is just underscored in these maps. More recently, the Census Bureau has done weekly pulse surveys to capture what is happening in food insecurity and rent and income and other kinds of basic needs. And through this, we also know that Black and Latinx renters were more likely to miss rent in May and June. In July too, the census put a pause on that survey, but they're actually beginning to field that survey again. And what we've done at the Urban Institute with that survey data, and will continue to do, is do a racial equity tracker. The survey allows you to look at this data at the state level and at metro level. And Houston is one of the regions that they track, and you can look at the disproportionate impact on non-payment of rent also in this tracker. But what I want to share with you today is a new tool that we just released this week that we hope will be helpful at the local level. It's called the Emergency Rental Assistance Priority Index tool. That's a bit of a mouthful. It was developed in partnership with other national organizations that came together to really inform a more equitable COVID-19 homelessness response. So our other partners include the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, the National Alliance to End Homelessness, the National Healthcare for Homelessness Council, and the National Low Income Housing Coalition. What's the purpose of the tool? It's enabled to take, it's really for you. It's a tool that we developed for task forces like this to guide communities in how and where to target rental assistance resources in a way that contributes to minimizing evictions and homelessness and promotes racial equity. It will enable you to identify priority neighborhoods using a number of indicators I'm going to discuss in a moment. And we're really thinking about this this is you as the audience. And I know that every place across the country distributes their rental assistance differently. I am inspired by the work you are doing to align this between the city and the county and to be very thoughtful in applying principles to rental assistance. So this, we hope, is a tool that you can use as you think of So it's made up of a couple of different kind of indices. This is the housing as a couple of the different dimensions of instability. And then COVID-19 job loss and uninsurance is the predominant COVID-19 indicators. And then lastly, we have a set of equity indicators. In here, we are focused on race, ethnicity, or immigration, public assistance, receipt, and income as the key indicators. So we really used the literature to inform these indicators about where households may be most vulnerable, especially due to the conditions of COVID-19. We weighted some of them, we weighted race more heavily due to the disproportionate impacts for people of color and particularly Black households in the crisis. And we weighted housing instability as half of the overall index because of the worry about eviction. And you'll see that I am going to take you directly to a page here where you would land when you come to this tracker. And you can put in your county or your continuum of care in the tracker, and it will pull up, and this is what it will look like for Houston. And you'll see it's by census tract, and the darker the census tract, the higher percentage of need. And you'll see that we, on the right-hand side here, we break it out by the kind of sub-indices. So you can see where in this, I don't know which census tract this is here that I picked out at the bottom here. It has a number, 333300. So for any data geeks, you may know what that is, but it shows you that sort of on par, this is a place where there's a lot of probably overcrowding or instability, eviction risk, where the COVID impact, the measures of health insurance and low-income job loss have been high, and where there is an equity consideration as well. So we're hoping that this tracker will be a useful tool to you. I know that you have a tremendous resource in the Kinder Institute in Houston that has done some of this work, and we hope that this kind of thinking can help complement that as you are thinking about how to target the rental assistance that you are offering. Let me just go back for a second here to my presentation. And this is my last slide here. Oops, there we go. I'm sorry. There we go. So as you think about your housing policy responses, and again, I want to underscore that I think a lot of you've done this thinking and the principles that I've just sort of witnessed and read in advance, that we think it's really important that the solutions are targeted to address prior inequities, not kind of get back to an equilibrium. We came into this crisis with an inequitable housing stability situation where Black and brown people are more likely to be housing unstable. And we don't want to get back to that place. We want to actually, I hope, use this moment to become more inclusive in our housing policy and improve housing stability overall. That rental assistance, and I so appreciated the presentation beforehand, and it made me think of some work we've been doing with Ramsey County in Minnesota on a housing court clinic that combines rental assistance along with these legal protections and eviction diversion programs. So think about that as a package, and just from what I listened to, it does seem like you are thinking about all of these things together, and we think that's critically important. So I also heard that sometimes renters don't know to reach out, or they are maybe not aware of the assistance that's being provided. You have such strong capacity in Baker Ripley and other organizations in Houston in this region. And what we have seen across the board is that cultural competency and outreach through organizations that are trusted in the community is critically important for these messages to be penetrating at this time. The complexity, as you pointed out, is so great for people to navigate. People aren't completing forms. They're coming to websites, they're kind of bouncing off. We can certainly improve the clarity of the information we're providing and the user experience, but I don't want to undercount the role that organizations that do that kind of outreach that are trusted in the community is critically important, especially for communities that are undocumented. Because some of the federal rental assistance does enable people without documentation to benefit. It needs to be complemented by other kind of philanthropic resources, but organizations who understand how to navigate that can make that available. I hope my presentation just in a tool will help and enable some neighborhood targeting, because as you can see, there are some neighborhoods that are disproportionately affected by this. The people in those neighborhoods are disproportionately affected by this. And we at Urban are really calling out the need to continue to disaggregate data by race, by ethnicity, by other kinds of household types, so that we can shape our programs more effectively to meet the need where it is. And I want to end by just saying that all this crisis is sitting on the top of a wider set of structural issues. Housing is not an entitlement. Coming into this crisis, we have a a situation where people have been on the waiting list for many, many years. And this is one of the equity issues, that you have low-income workers who may not have lost their job from this crisis, but have been on the waiting list and are eligible for affordable housing, maybe not getting assistance through this crisis, though they've been working through this crisis. And that is largely because housing is not a universal benefit. So we think a lot about that in this case. And that we really need to continue to center ourselves on the need to remove exclusionary barriers, rebalance neighborhood investments, and close employment, income, and wealth gaps overall. So with that, I will just end with a question. So what do we do about it? And I'm gonna stop sharing my slides and welcome thank you so very much for the invitation.
Great. So we have some time now for if people have questions for Erica. If you would like to ask a question, if you go under the participant tab at the bottom, you'll see a place where you can say raise hand, and I can unmute you and you can ask your question. If also you can put it in the chat as well if you can't find the raise hand button. Any questions for Erica?
Well, there aren't any questions. I might just also offer you, I don't know how closely you're tracking what's happening at the federal level. So I might just offer what I know, and you probably read some of this too, that there have been a lot of debates and discussions and negotiations. The Democrats from the House offered a bill that was passed for a $3 trillion CARES Act 2.0 package. It came over to the Senate, and they've been kind of negotiating about the amount and then what would be in that package. And there are still questions about the extent to which housing and more rental assistance would be in any kind of negotiated final package. The Senate left before that got completed. Negotiations have kind of stopped, and the expectation is that they will start again after Labor Day or maybe even before Labor Day. And one possibility is that because we're so close to the budget continuing resolution and the need to have extended budget through this election season, and oftentimes what we'll do in an election is they'll just kind of extend it for a few months. So what we understand now is what's likely to happen is that if there is a new CARES Act package, it will likely be connected to that continuing resolution, which does have an impact on some of the kind of budget caps and living underneath that kind of budget set of caps. So we're not exactly sure what's going to happen, but we hope that rental assistance will be a part of it. Urban Institute colleagues and I have estimated what that would look like on a monthly basis based on data analysis. We have done analysis around which delivery mechanisms, because there are a number of rental assistance delivery mechanisms that could be used, some of which help pay back rent, others that do not, which is a big issue. I think you all are very aware of this. The accumulated back rent serves as a potential for eviction, and we're trying to advance solutions that would enable back rent to be paid. There are just a lot of things that are very resonant with the work that you've been doing. See, there may have been some questions while I did that. So
yes, we do.
A little toe tapping, okay.
Curtis, if you want to go ahead and ask your question.
Sure. A big challenge that we're facing in light of your presentation, which is very good, by the way, is that the challenges that we're trying to address have an immediate dimension that is stopping the bleeding, if you will. And we understand also that it also has an underlying systemic dimension. And the question of how to balance our priorities of addressing the challenge in a way that begins to address a systemic problem is one that we're wrestling with. Did you design your data, and are you putting it together, your tools together in such a way where that they might be used to help us in that regard? Because the data and the observations of risk and who is at risk and who is at greatest need are very clear, but where we should make investments to address the systemic problems are not as clear.
So appreciate that question, Curtis. And yes, that's in large part the emphasis behind that tool. Because when you look at the distribution of people who've been affected by the COVID unemployment crisis and who would largely benefit from a CARES Act supplement of rental assistance, it is disproportionately higher income people. Because of this issue that you had coming into this crisis, so many low-income people who already were affected, many of whom are people of color, but may not have lost employment. They're just low-wage workers. I mean, they are the folks in the grocery stores, right? So, or delivering food to us in our homes. And so the tool that we developed really tried to use weights. We use sort of, weighting of our data to emphasize the structural issues that we think need to be given greater attention in this crisis. So as we think about where to target rental assistance, recognizing that if you were already low income to begin with, and you were Black or Hispanic, you were coming into this crisis with less of a cushion, with less savings to draw upon, to maybe, or a family member to ask to help you get through the crisis. And so that tool is trying to target the neighborhoods where we think the people with those challenges are more likely to live. And so that's the concept behind the tool, is to bring the center a bit more on some of the structural issues that were the case before coming into this crisis, and people that are going to have fewer resources and networks to draw upon to see them through it.
Great. I'm going to turn it to unmute Chriselle, if you would like to ask your question.
Sure, and thank you. Erica, this is a great presentation. It seems like such a really remarkable tool, and it definitely validates many of the, of course, what's going on here in Houston, and also validates many of the local studies. And so I'm just wondering if you, and I see Diana pointed to this in the chat, can you share what some innovative strategies or solutions that you've seen that have been applied by local jurisdictions that are using your data and validating what's going on locally? As I think a lot of times it's very helpful when a lot of times us working in the field see it every day. Researchers that are working in the space definitely lift it up. So it's always great to have like a national resource that's validating these things. But the struggle that I know that we've had, or we are having in Houston continuously, is really punching through some innovative strategies that can actually be implemented, not just drafted. So can you share maybe what you've seen in other places that have used this and been able to be successful?
Thank you. Well, nobody has used the tool yet because it just came out this week. We hope they will, and we hope it will lead to some of those innovative strategies. But I will say the inspiration we took for the tool was in conversation with people across the country. And we hold a weekly call, the Rental Crisis Working Group call, for a lot of the national organizations that are working on these issues that are connected up to the local organizations. And so we're always trying to share those innovations and have that inform the federal policy debate and discussion. So there are definitely efforts across the country, and I'll just hold out Oregon here, which made an explicit decision in when it allocated new funding for rental assistance through the coronavirus relief funds. And Oregon and Portland in particular have had a strong racial equity framework in their budgeting process for a while. They applied a racial equity lens to those coronavirus relief funds. And part of that was they worked with local community-based partners that were largely serving communities that were marginalized. And so they sort of like through their partners and the recognition of the need for outreach and where the hurt was happening, they were able to take that kind of more equity lens to the distribution of resources. So that was one approach that they took to make sure that they were reaching those communities. So that's, and we also, and I can share these links and have them distributed. About 6 weeks ago, maybe it was as 2 months ago, we did a full survey of rental assistance programs across the country as they were emerging. I mean, things have been happening so fast, we haven't necessarily refreshed that. But we can share that around to give you the kind of comprehensive set of lessons learned from what we saw in rental assistance programs that were being developed as a result of COVID or being leveraged, that were pre-existing and then leveraged in light of COVID. I alluded to Ramsey County as a model, an emerging model on eviction prevention that I would just mention here, and we've documented this too, and I can share this set of links as well. We've been working with the Family Housing Fund in Ramsey County, which, well, it's in the Twin Cities, but it's been working with the housing court or the court in Ramsey County to develop a sort of a mediation, and I heard this, like, how do you make sure people don't even reach court? Well, they developed a strategy with the judge in the court to have a kind of office outside the court to mediate evictions, and that has rental assistance attached to it to do a negotiation between tenants and landlords to prevent the eviction from reaching the court system. So we think that that is a really important strategy where you have the mediators who understand housing and you're in a court that understands housing. So it's a specialized kind of intervention with access to rental assistance that also has a mechanism to remove evictions from records too, because I think one of the main concerns too in this crisis is that evictions will sit on people's records, and that will be a larger impediment to housing stability in the future. And so how do we expunge those? And that's one of the things that this court has been working on too from an equity perspective. Like, how do we not let the hurt that's felt during this crisis continue even longer into someone's housing security challenges? So those are some of the things that I would just offer, and we can share links. I see there's some other questions.
Yeah. So there's some questions in the chat. A couple are related to the kind of methodology of the tool and how and is the accuracy different based off of the availability of regional data and kind of how it correlates with eviction outcomes and the social vulnerability index that Kinder is undertaking. So those are a couple of questions more about the tool itself.
Yeah, and I would say, so I did not work on the tool directly, and I'm happy to make my colleagues available. We were very in close touch with Kinder. Kinder is a part of our National Neighborhood Indicators Partnership, which is a group of 30 kind of like capacities across the country. And so we've been in conversation with Kinder. I don't know that I can answer your question specifically in terms of how they tested the various indices, but I'm happy to put you in touch with the person who led the tool. But know that we've been in conversation.
Great. And another question that is, can you provide more details on the federal rental assistance options that are being discussed with DC with pros and cons of the different approaches? Either.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Some links.
Yeah. Yep. And we can send around a paper that we published a few weeks ago. And here too, Urban Institute is evidence-led. So one of the things we're doing is we're applying an evidence lens to these considerations. But we used a couple of different criteria to look at the various rental assistance mechanisms in light of the crisis to identify which ones we think were best suited to address the crisis. And you all know that there are multiple ones. And we considered equity considerations. We considered efficiency for the moment because we need to have a lot of efficiency, but to equity. And then think about some of the market considerations. Like I said earlier, some of these delivery mechanisms work better for larger landlords than they do for smaller landlords. And one of the things I didn't touch on in my presentation, but we know to be true from the data, that we think that landlords of smaller properties are disproportionately impacted by this crisis. It's really hard to get the data for smaller landlords, but when we have dug into this and gotten other kind of private data sources, we see much, much higher rates of non-payment of rent. Many of those landlords are Black and brown, and they're entrepreneurs of color, and it means that their own wealth and stability is being affected. And we think this is maybe an under-discussed part of the crisis, this relationship, this kind of the ecosystem of this relationship, and that there are a set of solutions that we need to be developing to address that. But I would say if we focused on providing rental assistance to stabilize people, we would also be helping those landlords as well as critical. So let me get back to the rental assistance. So our paper basically said that given the criteria I just named, that the Emergency Solutions Grant Program, and which has been one of the primary vehicles for rental assistance right now, and housing vouchers are the two delivery mechanisms that we think are best suited to addressing the crisis.
Great. Any other questions from the group? And feel free to either type it in the chat or raise your hand.
Oh, let me just, I saw one part of the question that I missed. So in terms of this is census data, just on in terms of, and this is what's nationally available. So in terms of the underlying data, and then the Bureau of Labor Statistics and all these sort of national data sources were used to populate the tool. So we didn't dig into sort of additional local data sources, but rather use what was available nationally to create a tool that allowed for this kind of analysis. Sorry, I missed that.
I will just jump in here and note that the Texas Policy Lab, we're hoping, they have committed to be doing, as you all know, evaluations of the work that is going on. And so I think we're hoping to get the agreement secured from both the city and the county to share all of the data that happens as a result of this new round of rental assistance. And then I think with the resources that the Texas Policy Lab has, we'll be able to look and see exactly of the dollars that go out and use this tool to really map out of the total dollars that go out, which of them go into those zip codes and the census tract. So I think the tool will really be of enormous use for us as an evaluation tool to take the data and then bring it back to the decision makers real time. So I know we've already had conversations with Renee and the team at Baker Ripley about making sure that the team from the Texas Policy Lab is working with them at the outset so that all of the questions that we want to have that the evaluators look at, they can do, and to really do it expeditiously. So if there are no other questions, I think I want to just really extend our thanks yet again to Erica. I think not only for the extraordinary presentation this morning, but also just the unbelievable work that that you and the team at Urban are doing. I mean, we will send out both this as well as the links. I urge everyone to sign up for their email list because the data and the information that they present is really designed to help folks who are working to make a difference. And they are also really, I think, doing an enormously important job in terms of helping to frame and support the politicians at the national level who are really grappling with how best to develop policy responses to the crisis that we're in. So Erica, kudos to you and the entire team at Urban, and our deepest, deepest appreciation and gratitude to you.
Thank you, and thanks so much for the invitation today. It felt like coming home in so many respects. So really appreciate it. Thank you for all the work you're doing. And if I can be of any greater help or the team can be of help, please let us know. Have a good rest of your meeting. Take care.
Great. Thanks, Erica.
Bye.
Okay, and I think we're now going to have Claire send us out into our small groups. And really the organizing question is, we now need to really begin to focus on what are we going to do about it? What do we want our community's response to be? And how, as a task force, do we really want to use the information and the tools that Erica has exposed us to really help drive the set of recommendations that we're trying, that we're going to be making. So we're going to be in our groups until about 11:35 or so, and then we're going to come back out and report, and then we will close. Or I will then have Jeff update us on the eviction filings, and then we'll close. So we'll let us go into our small groups now.
Great. You should be able to, for those who have not already, see a option to join a group. For the individual on the phone, the 469 number, if you should be able to unmute yourself. If you just let me know what number, who you are, I can make sure to get you in the right group.
Okay, here comes Claire. Does she have instructions for us?
Yes, the question is to respond to the question that Erica posed to the group. So what do we do about it?
Yep. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So, and Jay's with us now. Does everybody know Jay?
So if anyone still in the group wants to join for the individual on the 469 number, if you just want to unmute your line and let me know. Okay. Hi, Jay. I'll connect you back with the group 4. Welcome back. So we are now going to do some report outs from the group. And so I'm going to unmute each of you to share your report outs. I'm going to mix it up and start it with group 4. So Jay, let me unmute you so that you can go first.
Thank you, Claire. So I'm going to do my best to report. I think that the most important thing that we discussed towards the end was the need for long-term policy solutions to recommend at the city, county, and state. And Representative Wally said that he was hoping that we could find some ideas for bills that could be filed for the 2021 session. So I think that's something that we need to keep in mind, that the session is coming up, you know, very soon. I mean, I think that the filings start in, you know, this fall. And so we need to keep that in mind. And then we also discussed we were interested in talking about targeted solutions and not getting back to normal. Elena and Renee both talked about the need to avoid unintentional consequences by figuring out ways to prioritize programs effectively, and seeing what actually worked when you're prioritizing, figuring out where the aid needs to go, and also how you can avoid those unintentional consequences. Jeremy talked about some of the challenges that that are currently occurring in his court, and the problems with the consequences of bad policy and how they impact certain areas of the county and the city, you know, that we need to use, you know, the levers of power. We need to encourage policymakers to use policy effectively to create better outcomes. And I also brought up the need to look at the different taxing entities that are related to housing and development, and figure out, you know, how the inequitable distribution happens, because a lot of these entities don't necessarily talk to each other, and figure out if there's ways that we can look at that, you know, how those tax dollars are distributed, and figure out ways to make it more equitable, and make sure that everything that we're doing in terms of housing policy, or encouraging housing policy, to have a focus on racial equity built into or baked into everything that they're doing.
Great, thank you. Now I'm going to move up to group 1 and have Zoe, so you should be able to unmute yourself.
Hi, everybody. Our group included Cynthia, Rick, Curtis, Margaret, Dara, and myself. And we talked about the choice between preventing risk or mitigating risk after the fact. And what do we want to do with these data-informed solutions? Do we want to inform policy wholesale, alluding to Jay's, you know, point to the ledge session and whatnot, or do we want to make programming tweaks? Where do we want to focus our energy to have the most impact? We also discussed, you know, I think Dara used this line that I'm stealing now forever, which is that, you know, data tells you where to look but not what to see. And so how do we incorporate in a way, you know, our qual data concerns that are not captured in a lot of this work with the quant data that we have, and how do we do that multiple times in a row to create better and better programs for people. And then, you know, always just understanding the nature of risk and the crunch that both landlords and tenants are in, and ultimately the situation that Houston finds itself in with housing is one where homes are treated as a commodity, instead of providing housing as a service or as a, you know, as something like that. So how do we create more of the homes that people need, more of the affordable housing that people deserve, and how do we help that when folks are in debt? So does this require doing some kind of post-rent financing once things are already built? Or do we need a housing trust fund in the city, which I think a lot of people are in support of, the creation of a housing trust fund to allow us more flexibility in building the stock that Houstonians need and preserving the existing stock as well. That's all.
Great, thank you. And then I'm going to move to group 2 and have Diana give an update.
Hi, everyone. We had Mark, Donna, Jennifer, who's I believe from Guidehouse, new to the team, Sonia and Elaine and myself. So we had a spirited discussion on access to justice work. I think there's a desire to kind of elevate that conversation and really ensure that we understand the scope of that work and the prioritization of what the task force is doing, to confirm we have sort of group buy-in on that front. So kind of maybe we didn't formally recommend it, but speaking on behalf of the team, maybe we want to recommend that at the next meeting we have a deeper dive into that conversation, to make sure we're all on the same page as a task force there. We also spoke about the desire to kind of understand whether there's a marginal or significant difference in using the urban index versus the SVI, kind of social vulnerability index, that we've been integrating in some of our direct assistance and rental assistance work to date. So understanding, is the index better? If so, how? So maybe a request to Kinder or January advisors to look into that question for us. And then I think we posed a question to Jennifer or Guidehouse to understand how on the county and perhaps Tom on the city side, what kind of geographic allocation policy, or thinking is being made right now, and how could we formalize our stance on that and either pick the best index or kind of just make a formal recommendation moving forward, because I think we've been experimenting and iterating based on administrator to date. So I think that was another component. And then Mark made a request that we just share out some of the work group highlights and points being made in writing, so that we have some of the conversations that are having in some of these breakout groups kind of get elevated to the rest of the task force.
Great, thank you. And finally, the third group, I'm going to have Jeff give an update.
All right. The vast majority of our conversation talked about the racial equity lens, race ethnicity equity lens associated with administering, assistance with the limited resources that are there. We talked a little bit about where and how that data can be collected, or numbers can be backed into without necessarily collecting that data. We talked about the ethics associated with that, and just some practical means around who has what information and how that can be assembled at a community level. We talked a little bit about the Urban Institute tool and how that can serve as a really good platform to build upon with other data sets that are more customized for our region, and how accurate it is at identifying the neighborhoods that we have that are vulnerable, or that have people who are housing vulnerable in them, but also how we can get to that next level of information to know, like, just because a neighborhood scores high on these national indicators, that doesn't necessarily get to the nuance of who's in need of immediate help and who needs longer term, maybe lighter touch support. So we really got into the details around that and had a great conversation. Yeah, that's what we did.
Great. And Jeff, if you want to just take it from here to give an update on the eviction filings.
Sure, I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen if that's okay with y'all.
Yes.
So everybody can see my screen here. I'm going to give this update every couple of weeks. I'd love to know what you'd like to see from the data. I'm just gonna highlight a few key points, and I don't wanna belabor the point. As it stands right now, eviction activity is steady overall. It's still very high, as we'll get to, but not quite at the kind of disproportionate levels pre-pandemic. So we are seeing kind of a steady trend here. The most recent data takes a few days to come in, so that's why you see kind of down at the very tail end there a fewer filings. But this dotted line gives us the 30-day trend. So the 30-day trend is steady. That means that we're not hitting moments where some folks are saying, that there's massive amounts of eviction cases being filed. That's not true yet, but that doesn't necessarily mean that there's not massive instability happening. In terms of an August snapshot to date through August 27th, we're seeing about 1,700 eviction cases filed across Harris County with a total claim amount of about $3 million. And as consistent with previous months, about 2.5% of defendants' tenants are assisted by attorneys. Now, what does that mean? That means that, Greenspoint and Alief continue to be hotspots in terms of neighborhoods. They also have a lot of renters in those neighborhoods. These are also, generally from a census data standpoint, these are largely Black communities that are facing this trouble. We're seeing 1,100 cases within the city of Houston, so almost 2/3 of the cases happen within the city of Houston, but that also means that 1/3 is happening outside the city of Houston, and we need to think about those folks as well. In the previous month, in July, we had about 2,136 cases filed, and as a point was made earlier in a breakout session, there's disproportionate numbers of renters in different JP precincts. So we're seeing a disproportionate amount of case volume in precinct 5, followed by precinct 4. So targeting those 4 justices of the peace from any policy recommendation standpoint that falls within their discretion, this task force would be wise to look at those 4 JPs first. Nationally, how does this compare? Our region has more evictions last week than any other jurisdiction. Really, the only jurisdiction in our league in terms of total number filed is Phoenix, Arizona. That's Maricopa County. And of particular note, we don't really talk about our friends on the island very much, but Galveston County has an extremely high eviction rate. That's the number of evictions per total number, or I should say, total number of evictions divided by total number of renter-occupied housing units. So that's very alarming. That means that while Galveston County doesn't have as many total renters, there's a disproportionate share of people who are very vulnerable. And I think we should, as a task force, try to, as much as we can, reach out, make contact with folks down there as much as possible, and try to include them in our overall strategies, even though our charge is only within the city of Houston and Harris County. Finally, I want to note that the Eviction Lab came out with a study yesterday that shows that the majority of eviction case filings have a claim amount that really isn't very high. There's this story that is used to justify certain decisions. That is, if a renter falls behind on rent, they fall multiple months behind, they dig a big hole, we need to figure out how to get them out of that hole. That's true, we do need to figure that out. But from this data analysis, at least, it shows that that hole is actually not that big by the time it gets to the eviction case filing. And that also one of the reasons why evictions haven't rocketed back up is because people have been very resourceful with the limited amounts of stimulus dollars, paycheck protection dollars, as they're a beneficiary of, things like that. They've been very resourceful paying their bills to ensure that that they're not going to be evicted. So I would encourage us to continue to monitor these things and see kind of where we fall nationally, and also to just get a better sense of the nuances of what's driving these case filings. And that concludes my report.
Great. And I think we have if anyone had any major questions, feel free. I think we have a couple of minutes. One that I saw that John flagged in the chat was related to seeing how this number of eviction files compares to this time last year. So I don't know if you had any thoughts on that, or if that's something also for future future kind of updates.
Yeah, so we definitely have on our roadmap to put year-over-year comparisons, at the very least, to 2019. I think that's extremely important. Evictions are seasonal. I think one thing to note is that what you see here at the front end in January and February is indicative of case filings. It's not necessarily going to be the exact same number in July. It's actually typically a little bit more this time of year, if I recall correctly. But it'll give you an idea that we're trailing about 30 to 50% of typical eviction case filing volume, which you can see it through 2 different lenses. One is that it's a vast improvement over where we were last year in terms of eviction case filings, but we're also in a very different world than we were last year. So yeah, I will go ahead and deliver those numbers in future updates.
Great. And then looks like Curtis has a question. So Curtis, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Quick question to Jeff in terms of the geography of the eviction filings within Harris County. It came up in our group that there may be subtle market-related issues that are driving impacts on eviction filings, like neighborhoods that have under pressure with forces of gentrification, or that might have large apartment complexes that are subject to acquisition in the housing commodity markets. Is there a way to begin to get a feel for the granularity of this through the data?
That's a great
impacts
question.
On communities.
That is a great question. I think what we would need to do is identify those complexes. HCAD can tell us when they last changed hands. HCAD can also tell us the owner information, whether or not they're out of state. It doesn't give us, as finely detailed information as we would like, but I think it's a good enough proxy. And that can really help us understand a little bit more about those sub-markets that exist. What I would say though is that generally speaking, these neighborhoods that are highlighted here, my takeaway on this, as best as I can infer from the data, is that the neighborhoods that pop out here have a high number of renters, so they're going to have a high number of eviction cases filed. They're disproportionately communities of color, and specifically Black neighborhoods, and that we have a suspicion that there are self-evictions happening in Hispanic neighborhoods, but that doesn't manifest in the data itself, and we're trying to get a better picture of that. I think to your point, what we can do is start to look at those larger complexes across these neighborhoods and get a better understanding of how frequently they're changing hands, and what kinds of other gentrification pressures are happening there in the surrounding areas.
Great. There's one more question related specifically to Jeff's update from Donna. Jeff, your research very helpful. Can you determine how many self-represented defendants cases are dismissed regardless of the reason?
That's a really good question. I think that we should, Donna, you and I should talk about that, because I think there's a lot of nuances in that data where I'm not exactly sure why a particular outcome happens. So I would love to connect with you early next week to discuss that further, and then we can report that out.
Great. And then I wanted to give a chance for Chriselle, if you would like to kind of comment on the comment that you put into the chat related to your small group, if you are interested.
Yeah, sure. I know we were limited on time, but just want to kind of piggyback on what Jeff shared out, because what he shared out was a result of an ongoing conversation that we started talking about, like the role that the task force can really play. And I guess just wanted to be clear that it's clear that that the task force has a lot of validity and credibility, rather, when we made the recommendation for the housing for the eviction grace period. And although it did not make it to the council agenda, people are still talking about it. People are still pushing for it. Although we're trying to uplift some other recommendations and policies. So one of the things that I kind of lifted up was recognizing that what was shared during the presentation, it's not necessarily new, but it definitely validates what we have seen and what's continuing to go forward. And so the recommendation was that we make a statement or make some type of recommendation that COVID response is done through a racial equity lens. And then also understanding that there are so many different roles in the community, really identifying what a potential call to action could be to each of the so-called, I'll say, players, when it comes to, those that are implementing programs, social services, the electeds, the landlord community, like what are the things that we can say, how you actually lead through racial equity lens. And then, we have the data, we are continuing to mine over the data to really help to substantiate that. But that would be kind of a stake in the ground to kind of acknowledge that this is something, and this is not something that just comes out of thin air. Mayor Turner Commission and Equity report several years ago. The county is now, very, working towards really lifting up equity in the way in which the bond is being applied and going beyond that. So now is the time to really raise that. And I think that we can be one of the first groups that represent so many different parties that can be solid on a position.
Great, thank you. And so now I'm going to turn it to Stephen and the co-chairs to make some closing remarks. So I'm unmuting you now. Great.
Who wants to go?
I want to go first.
Well, I would say, Stephen, did you have any closing, I guess, some
Sure.
housekeeping matters as we move forward?
Sure. Just from a housekeeping matter standpoint, you will, I think Claire is putting into the chat room right now the survey. I really will ask yet again for task force members to even just very quickly complete it and give us some quick thoughts. That's the way we get feedback, so we can know how to make things better. We might become more aggressive by not letting you get the actual presentations that I know everybody wants until surveys are completed. So we have tools at our disposal. But no, on a serious note, we'll also be quickly sharing out the excellent tools and resources that Erica shared with us tonight as well, or this morning, as well as the information that Jeff shared. So with that, I'll turn it over to Rick and Jeremy.
Yeah, so I think this is a great dialogue today, great information. Please fill out the surveys. Obviously, we need to make sure we're going in the right direction with that. So thanks for everybody attending today.
And I just want to echo those comments. I appreciate the conversations today. Thank you to Jeff and thank you to Erica for the presentation. A lot of times when it comes to evictions, we think of personal responsibility and what that person did to get evicted and not look at programs and policy. And so I appreciate you all having a kind of a what we call, what my grandma used to call a come to Jesus moment, and looking at how our policies are and in relation to our inequities. And so on a personal note, I see those inequities in my court every day. So I thank you all for the continued work. And on a personal note, those are the places I grew up in. Those are where my family and friends are. And so as we move forward, addressing the crisis as is, but how do we make sure these type of crises and inequities don't happen again? And so it was a great conversation today. Thank you all. Remember your survey. Remember to fill out your survey. If I have to send out a warrant for anybody that doesn't complete one, I will. I don't know if that's in my power, but I'll do it anyway. But to that, it is 12 noon. So I want to get you all out in time. If Rick or Stephen doesn't have anything else, thank you all.
Good. Thank you, guys. Take care.